Alright, welcome to part 3 of the weapons system tutorial. In the last two, we got it so you can pick up weapons, and they'll attach correctly, and they'll also drop if you don't have room for it. So I think next we'll work on making it so if you hold down the right mouse button, it aims the character in. So to do that, let's go to the character blueprint, and let's go back to the event graph. And under these two events, let's just go ahead and right-click and say input action ADS for aim down sights. So when the player aim down sights, we basically just want to set a boolean for true that they're aiming down sights, and when they stop aiming down sights, we just want to set it to false. So let's create a variable, very similar to how they have the jump button down and crouch button down. We'll call this aim button down, and we'll set it to a boolean. And again, if they press it, we will set it to true, and when they release it, we'll go ahead and set it to false. And that's pretty much all we need to do right there, because the majority of this code for making him aim is going to be inside of the animation blueprint. So to get the animation blueprint associated with this character, just click on the mesh, and over here on the right, under animation, you'll see there's animation class. So this is the animation blueprint that it's using. If you click the little magnifying glass, it will browse you to it, and you can see it is right here in the animation starter pack folder. There's this UE4 ASP hero third person perspective and in blueprint. So go ahead and double click on that. And let's go ahead and for right now, let's just go back to the event graph. And let me also open this on my other project so I can have something to reference. Just 1 second. Okay, so if you remember before, we made it so when the ADS button is pressed, which is the right mouse button, the aiming down sights boolean gets set to true. And we want to get access to that here inside of the event graph so that we can use it in our animation blueprint. So if you see right here, kind of in this movement section towards the bottom, they are casting the pawn owner to the character, which is the player. And we want to go ahead and just promote this to a variable so we can access it in other places. So let's just say promote to variable. And make sure you hook this back up to here and to here. And you can also replace these pins with this pin, just to make it a little cleaner, like that. And we will name this player, since this is the player. And from this, we can actually say, get aim button down. But we don't actually need to do that right here. We're going to do that somewhere else. But that's just the reason why we're storing the player, is so we can get access to this variable. So we can just delete that. So the place we're going to want to get access to that variable is inside of the animation graph. So if you open this up, you can see it's doing the basic locomotion state machine and just returning that as the output. But we want to kind of modify this a little bit so that it accounts for aiming. So if we go inside of here, you can see we have our state machine. And if you think about it, we want the player to be able to aim down sights whenever he's jogging, whenever he's crouch walking, whenever he's crouched, or whenever he's idle. But we don't want to do it whenever he's running or jumping. So we only want to put it inside of these 4. So let's go ahead and start with the jog one. So we double click on this, and we're going to need to do a little bit of editing here. So you can see by default, it just says, use this blend space for jogging and return that. But we want to make another blend space that is a blend space for jogging and aiming down sights. And then we want to do a branch to see if he's aiming, and if he is, we want to use that one instead of this one. So before we can even do that, we need to actually create the blend space. So if we go back to our content folder and inside the animation starter pack, you can see we have a blend space for jogging and we have a blend space for crouching, or for crouch walking. So let's go ahead and just duplicate both of these. So we'll duplicate this one and we'll call it bs_jog iron sights. And iron sights just means it's their way of saying aiming down sights. So I'm just trying to keep the naming consistent. And again, we'll duplicate this one and call it bs_crouch walk iron sights. And if we double click on the BS jog iron sights, you can see this is the blend space it's using for when the player is jogging. But you can see he's not aiming down the sights, he just has the rifle at his hip. So we want to replace all of these animations here with the animations of him jogging, but with iron sights. So the way these are set up is that on the left side we have jog left and jog left, or sorry, how do they have this set up? Jog left, jog forward, jog right, and jog backwards. What? I think they made a mistake, actually. I'm like 99% sure this bottom left one is supposed to be jog backwards. So the way we want to set this up is come back to our anim browser, and for these left two nodes over here, we want to use, if you search for iron sights, we want to use the one for walk, left, rifle, iron sights. So drag that in. If you drag it on top of the little diamonds, it will replace it. So you can see now when he's walking left, he's using iron sights, like so. And, oh, sorry, this is supposed to be backwards. I did that wrong. So these far left ones are supposed to be backwards. So drag in the backwards and the backwards on top of those. Sorry. So we should be walking backwards when you have it all the way over here on the left. And these ones are the ones we want for left. So drag in left and left. And this middle one here, we want forward. So forward and forward. And then for these two, we want right. So right and right. And for these two, we want backwards. So backwards and backwards. So now if we move this little green pin around, we should see him, should see him going left and forward and right and backwards. And it should behave the same on the top as well. All right, so that looks pretty good. So now that we have that created, we can go back and do the crouching one. So go search and open up the BS crouch walk iron sights. Oops, don't do that. All right, so inside of here, we basically want to do the same thing, except we want to use the crouching ones. So drag in crouch walk backwards, rifle iron sights over here to the left, and over here to the left. And then these two are the left, so drag in left and left. And these two middle ones are for forward, so drag in forward and forward. And these are right, so right and right. And these two are backwards, so backwards and backwards. So as you can see now, we have backwards, backwards, right, right, forward, forward, left, left, and backwards, backwards. All right, so now these are set up and we can go ahead and make use of them. So back in the animation blueprint, like I was saying before, we can drag in our BS jog iron sights and copy the direction and the speed and hook them up. And we want to do a check to see if he's aiming down iron sights, and if he is, we want to use this one, and if he's not, we want to use this one. So there's a special little node for that called blend pose by bool. And the bool we want is the one that we were talking about before. So get player and get aim button down. So if the aim button is down, then if it's true, we want to use the iron sights. If it's not, we want to use the normal jog. And then we can hook that up like so. Now let's go back to the locomotion graph. We want to do the same thing for crouch walking. So drag in the crouch walk iron sights, and again, hook up the direction and speed. And again, we want to use that blend poses by bool. And if it's true, true, and if it's false, it's false. And it is get player. Well, I guess we can just drag it in. Get player and get aim button down is the boolean. So now we have our crouch walking and our jogging hooked up correctly. And last thing we need to do is idle and crouch. They should be pretty easy. So inside of idle, you can see it's just playing this idle rifle hip. And the one we want to search for is the same thing, but for iron sights instead of hip. So idle rifle iron sights. And just like we did before, we want to do that blend poses by bool. So blend poses by bool. and this is false, and this is true, and that goes into the output. And we want to say player get aim button down. And then finally, we can go back and do the crouch. So we have crouch, idle, rifle, hip. We want crouch, idle, rifle, iron sights. And we want blend poses by bool. And this is true and false. And player, and get aiming down, aim button down. And hook that up. All right, so now if we go ahead and we run this, and we hold down the right mouse button, you can see he aims down sights. If I let go, he stops. It'll also work if he's walking, and if he's crouching, and if he's crouching and not moving. You can see all the cases work, and that's because we added it to all the different cases in the animation graph. So now that he can aim down sights, we can start working on giving him the ability to shoot. One thing you might want to do in your game is make it so that he can only aim down sights if he actually has a gun. So if you go to the character, that's like really easy to do. Well, I guess we do it inside of the... Well, no, we'll just do it here. So when he presses it, instead of just directly setting aim button down, we will drag in the equipped gun and just drag off of is valid. So that way it's only going to say that the aim button is down if he actually has a weapon equipped. So we run this now and we right click, you can see it doesn't do anything. But if we go and we grab a gun and we hold it down, you can see now he aims down sights with his rifle. So one thing you'll notice right at the bat is if you try to look up or down, the character doesn't actually look up and down with you. And in most shooters, if you look up, then the character would be aiming up, and if you look down, he'd be aiming down. But as you can see, he just keeps aiming forward. And that's because there's no code or any sort of logic to handle that right now. So that's one thing we're going to have to add. And in order to do that, you need something called an aim space. So if we come back to our animation starter pack folder, let's just go ahead and right click on this and make a new folder and call it aim space, just so we have a place where we can put the aim spaces. And if you come back here and you search for aim underscore space, you can see we have two of them, one for the hip and one for the iron sights. And the one we care about is the iron sights, so let's go ahead and just move that into our aim space folder, like so. So now back inside the aim space folder, if you double click and you open this up just to see kind of what it does, you can see it's basically just the guy looking up in all different directions, left, right, and forward. And for our purposes, we only really care about this up and down right here. We don't care about these when he's looking left or right because we don't have that functionality in our game. It's just up and down when he's looking forward. So we want to extract these poses so that we can create an aim space off of them. So we want to extract the pose when he's looking forward, we want to extract the pose when he's looking up, and we want to extract the pose when he's looking down. And we'll combine all of those into a namespace. So to do that, just drag this all the way to the left, and then we'll create an asset. So create animation from the current pose, and make sure you select the aim space folder, and just go ahead and call this like aim space center. Hit OK. And then we'll go back to our namespace animation and drag it to the right. Actually, it's probably better to use these little buttons because you want to get the frame where he's looking the most up, which is this one. And then once you have it on that frame, just go to create animation again and do it from the current pose. And we'll call this aim space up. And go back and open it up again. And then do it again until you get him where he's looking the most down, which is this frame. And create animation from the current asset. And the aim space folder, and I'll call it aim space down, like so. Ooh, I think I clicked the wrong button. Yeah, I accidentally created a pose on accident. Don't do that. I'm going to delete the down one real quick, and I'm going to have to remake it because I did it wrong. So open this up again, and bring it back to the beginning. And find the pose where he's looking the most down, which is right this one. So create animation, and current pose. I think I accidentally did pose asset last time. You want to make sure you do create animation from current pose. And click aim space, and we'll say aim space down. And we'll hit OK. So now if we go back, you can see we have aim space down, aim space up, and aim space center. I'm just going to file and save all this. So now we have our 3 different directions that we want him to aim. We can create an aim space. So right click and go to animation and hit aim space offset. Or I guess it's called aim offset, sorry. Aim offset 1D, and that stands for 1 dimension since it's just up and down. Go ahead and create one of those. And make sure you select the skeleton from the, you can see on the tooltip there, it's from the animation starter pack. So we want this one. And we'll call it aim space iron sights. So the way this works, it's kind of like a blend space. You can drag in animations, but you can see if I try to drag in an animation, it shows as a little red pen, and it's not actually going to let me add any of these because the animation that you need to drag in, it has to be set as additive. So if we go back, we want to set these 3 animations, our center, down, and up, to additive. So double click on this, and to do that, over here on the left, you have the additive settings. We want to set it to mesh space. We want to set this base pose type to selected animation frame. And the frame we want to base it on is, I think it's called idle underscore, let's see, it's idle something. Idle rifle iron sights. So we want to set this one as the base, idle rifle iron sights. And then we can save that, and we want to do that for all 3 of these. So do it for all 3 of them. And again, it's idle rifle iron sights. Save. And one more. Mesh space, selected animation frame, and idle rifle iron sights. Save. So now if we go back to our aim space that we created, if we search for our aim space animations that we created, we can drag the down over here on the left, we can drag the center into the middle, and we can drag the up to the right side. And you can see if I drag this pen, very much like blend spaces, he will look down, center, and up, depending on where this pen is. And one thing you'll notice that doesn't look great is for some reason with these animations, when you go up, his hand kind of goes out to the right, and then once you get back, it goes back to where it's supposed to be. If you want to fix that, you can just add more keyframes in here. So you'd have one for like here and here and here, for example, and that would fix that issue. I'm just not going to bother doing that right now because it would take too much time, but you would just create more of these. You'd have an aim space center up like 20 degrees, 40 degrees, 60 degrees, and whatever, and you just plug those in, and that would fix that issue. But it's just the way the interpolation happens to work for this animation. It doesn't look too great, but again, I don't want to waste too much time going over the little fine-tuning details, but that's how you would fix that if you want to. So now we have our aim space working. We can go ahead and add it to our animation graph. So go back to the animation graph and just double click over here on animation graph to go back to the top level. And inside of here, let's go ahead and hook that up. So if you right click and search for aim space iron sights, you can see it shows up right here. So aim offset aim space iron sights, just go ahead and select that and hook that up and hook that up. So it's asking for 2 parameters. One of them is alpha. We're just going to leave that as 1. That's just the strength of it. We just want to leave it as 1. And this other one, we forgot to rename it, so it's currently just set to none, but we should actually probably go and rename this. So double click on this, and really what this represents is the pitch. So rename it to pitch over here on the left. And we actually should change these as well. So the pitch is going to go from -90 to +90, and this is really the pitch of the camera. So like where is the camera looking? If the camera's looking straight down to the floor, it's going to have a pitch of -90, and it's going to use this value. If the camera's looking all the way up in the air, it's going to use a pitch of +90, and it's going to use this value. And if it's somewhere in between, it's going to interpolate using these values, right? So that's essentially what that is. So when we come back here, we need to pass something for the pitch. You can see if I just hard code this to 90, and I go ahead and I run this, it's going to do some pretty weird stuff because it's currently applying this in all use cases. So if I pick up the gun though and I aim it down sights, you can see it looks more or less as it should, where he's aiming up in the air if he was actually looking up in the air. So that's what that value is. Obviously, we don't just want to hard code it to 90, and we obviously don't want to call it unless he's actually aiming down the sights. So we need to make this a variable. So right click on this and promote it to a variable, and we will call this camera pitch. And we need to set that back in the event graph. So if you go to the event graph and we drag off of this part down here, because this is where the execution ends last, we want to set the camera pitch based off the actual pitch of the player's camera. So we can drag in our player, and we can say get player camera, and let's just make sure that's valid. So we'll say is valid. And we also want to make sure that the aim button is down, because like I was saying before, we don't want to apply this aim offset unless you're actually aiming on sights. So we'll say get aim button down, and we'll do an and to make sure that both of these are true. And we'll do a little branch. So if both of these are true, then we want to set this camera pitch, and we want to set it based off the world rotation of the camera. So I'm just going to drag this over, make a little reroute node here. So if it's true, we can drag off this and say get world rotation. And we can split this so that we can get all the values, because we only really care about the pitch. And we will set the pitch, if it's true, to whatever this returns. If it's not true, we're just going to set the pitch to 0, because we don't want to have any aim offset. Like so. So now that should be pretty good. If we go ahead and rerun this now, let's play. You can see if I look up and down, it's not doing that weird thing anymore. And if I go ahead and I pick up a gun, and I aim down sights, and I look down, you can see he's actually looking down. And maybe if I pop out of the player a little bit, it will be easier for you to see. So if I aim down, and I eject, you can see he's aiming down at the ground. And if I aim like straight up in the air, you can see he aims straight up in the air. So now that looks pretty good. So really the only things we need to do now is make it so that you can actually shoot the gun, and make it so that it plays a little animation on your character whenever you shoot. So that is what we'll do in the last part of the tutorial, part 4. So I'll see you in the next video.